Morning everyone, welcome to Political Fight Club. So this episode is going to be on something a little bit morose and sad, and I promise we'll do a couple of other episodes later today that'll be a little bit happier and more upbeat, but today is the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. So I know what a lot of you are thinking, what's the Tulsa Race Massacre? I never learned about that in school. Well, neither did I, and that's because our school system chooses to leave stuff out like this that is extremely racist and extremely embarrassing as far as government intervention and what they didn't do to prevent this back in the day. So this wasn't that long ago. I mean, 100 years is nothing, guys. I mean, we've come a little bit in terms of like getting rid of racist tendencies since then. But really, we haven't come nearly far enough, and I'm going to bring this full circle after also going after Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and telling you about how they're not taking any steps to avoiding, future racist violence in our system. So, first and foremost, let's fill you in on the Tulsa Race Massacre. What happened was that in a section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, I think it's called Greenwood Village, there used to be a stock market that was for only black people, and it was doing very, very well. It was a very affluent area where blacks were basically like making money on par with whites. And what happened is that there was allegedly, and I think this is true, there was a headline in one of the local newspapers, I think it was May 31st of 1921, and it said that there was a 17-year-old white elevator operator girl who was assaulted by a black man. The black man was in custody and in a jail, and a whole bunch of white people basically stormed Tulsa to try to lynch him. A whole bunch of armed black people showed up at the jail to make sure that he did not get lynched. And somewhere along the way, a tussle started, and then it wasn't a riot. People will call it a riot. That's not the right word. This was a massacre. A whole bunch of white people walked into Tulsa, Oklahoma. They killed hundreds of black people, including, injuring tons of more, thousands more. And they burned down the entire district, displacing over 10,000 people, I think, were displaced in one night until the National Guard had to come in and stop everything. So I think the total numbers there was hundreds of black people dead and a handful of white people dead. But let's not get it twisted, guys. The white people went in there and just killed a whole bunch of black people. And any whites that were killed was in self-defense. So any way that anybody tries to spin this any other way, they're lying to you. And that's part of the reason they don't teach this to you, typically in American school system, is because it is a huge blemish on the reputation of our government intervening when it comes to racial issues. And they still, to this day, don't do a very good job. So this is tragic, something you should definitely look up for yourself. I'm going to post a link to a great article that the Oklahoman wrote a couple of days ago that has some video. I highly recommend you read it and watch the video. It's got some first-hand accounts of the survivors that were still alive. So they were children, and they're in there, they'd be like, 100 years old right now. But they still remember what happened, and I think the video is a little bit old, but it's still very, very good. So I want to move on now to what Biden and Kamala Harris could easily do to help black people in this country, but they won't. Okay? First things first, and this is super easy. You have to go at the private prison industry. Okay? Predominantly, most people that are in the private prison system right now are people of color, and if you guys know and have been watching this show, people of color get arrested 4 to 5 times the same rate as white people for committing the same types of offenses, especially when it comes to like bullshit drug offenses, like you've got some weed in your pocket. And that's by design. That's because the system is a little bit racist, kind of in its bones. So there should be no such thing as private prisons. You should not have a profit motive for arresting people, which is why a lot of these people that haven't really committed any real crime end up in prison, is because there's a motive. It costs a lot of money to keep a prisoner in a private prison, and these private prisons make a ton of money via government subsidies to stay open if they can guarantee that they'll hit their prisoner quota. And just so you guys know, it cost very much more to keep a prisoner in a private prison cell and to feed them and make sure that they're okay than it does to simply give them a college education. It costs more to keep them in prison than it does to give them a college education, period. So this is a nefarious issue, a nefarious system, because capitalism has overtaken a system in our country that should never have a profit motive. So Biden could easily wage war on the private prison industry, and so could Kamala Harris. But they're not going to, because they're in the pockets of the lobbyists of the private prison industry. And there's another big reason, which I'm going to go over last here. Number 2, end qualified immunity for police officers. This would be super easy. Qualified immunity means that if somebody, like, something happens to someone in your family where a police officer shoots them, you can't sue them in civil court because they have qualified immunity. Ending qualified immunity would be a huge hit to police brutality, because all those cops would be worried that they are not only going to get now criminal charges, as we've seen with precedent with Derek Chauvin getting second-degree murder and all those other charges, but they would also be at risk of getting a civil suit against them for doing something stupid. That itchy trigger finger that they have when they see black people on the street that are unarmed would suddenly become a lot less itchy if you get rid of qualified immunity. And some people, I think Bernie Sanders has advocated for this, but I've been advocating for it since I started this show and for years before that. So end qualified immunity, and that would help tremendously in getting rid of police brutality, particularly in the case of particularly in this country, police brutality is against black people, so it would help them tremendously. Number 3, you could do reparations. And the first thing that everybody says when I say reparations is they go, "Oh, are you going to pay for it?" First of all, you don't have to pay for all of these things. Modern monetary theory says that you can just basically, if you have the resources to do something, you can pay for anything you want to up front, and then the investment that you're making in said thing will pay for itself in a lot of ways in the future. But I digress. Let's talk about how you pay for it. It's super easy, actually. And everybody who says that, they don't know how much it cost. They don't have any ideas. They just don't want to do reparations to black people, and so they speak up like that. So I'll tell you how you pay for it. You do something like what Evanston, Illinois did like a month ago. I did an episode on it. They legalized marijuana, they taxed it, and they used part of the tax dollars brought in via the weed to pay for reparations for everyone in the district. $25,000 per household. You could easily do something nationally where you just use the weed tax to do reparations. Period. Now, what the numbers would have to be, I don't know, because it hasn't been studied, and I don't know exactly, you have to decide, like they did in Evanston, Illinois. You had to be a descendant from a family that was in, had directly been affected by segregation back in the day, and honestly, in Evanston, they didn't give out nearly enough money. Now, they're going to continue to do it over the years and give out more and more money as they continue to sell marijuana, but they didn't do nearly enough, in my opinion. We have to decide is there a number you can put on someone suffering, their family being, just tortured for hundreds of years? I don't think you can, but I know $25,000 is too fucking low. So, but we can give reparations to a lot of these families, and it would not be that hard. I mean, just go grab Bezos and Elon by their ankles and shake them upside down and get the gold coins that fall out of their pockets, and you can probably do a lot of this stuff just taxing billionaires. But I would just do what Evanston did. Tax and regulate marijuana and use some of that tax revenue to pay for reparations nationwide. Easy. Number 4, and I really just went over it, legalize marijuana nationwide, and that pays for the reparations, which is number 3. And then lastly here, a minimum wage hike. Now, I'm no longer advocating for a $15 minimum wage. I'm advocating for a $25 minimum wage, because if you adjust for inflation and productivity since the 60s, it should be about $24 to $25 right now. And simply the fact that it's going to take us years to get that, I'm aiming higher, because, it might take us a decade to get something like that, at which point even $20 to $25 is going to be even a little too low. So I'm aiming high. We could absolutely do that. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris deliberately let the $15 minimum wage die in the rescue plan. It was included in there at first, and they didn't overrule the Senate parliamentarian, and it got kicked out by Elizabeth McDonough, the parliamentarian. Apparently, the parliamentarian is more powerful than the president and the vice president of the United States. I didn't know this. I always wanted to grow up and be president, but I should have been really aspiring to be the parliamentarian. They're the most powerful person in the United States, apparently. So those are the things just off the top of my head that I wrote down before this show that could be done. It's not an exhaustive list, but these would be easy. Now, is Biden or Kamala Harris fighting for any of these things? No. In fact, if any of these things were pushed by the squad or Bernie Sanders, they would actively fight against it. Why is that? Because Joe Biden is racist. If you don't believe me, go back and watch the debates where Kamala Harris, his now VP, called him out for being a segregationist back in the day, which he was. He was on the side of the segregationists and working with them when it came to school buses back in the day. And if you remember correctly, Kamala Harris poleaxed him in, I think it was debate 2 or 3, about how she was actually one of the segregated kids on those segregated school buses. And then look at her, as soon as she's offered the VP position, she's like, "Oh, sorry, Massa, I'll do whatever you want. Just give me that career that I've been vying for so hard." She'll throw absolutely all of her principles, if she ever had any, especially regarding race, to the wind if it means she can advance her career. But I digress. The other thing I wanted to point out, the main reason that Joe Biden is on the wrong side of a lot of this stuff is that he architected most of it via the 1994 crime bill. A lot of the police brutality nowadays, the weaponization and militarization of our police force, the private prison industry, all started with the crime bill. So if he were to come out on the right side of a lot of these racial issues and do a lot of the things I just told you, he'd just be simply undoing his own work, and he does not want to do that. Why doesn't he want to do that? Because he's still racist. He still thinks he did the right thing. So I want to point out also, guys, that I'm trying to weaponize your brain in a way that in the upcoming election, nobody falls for things like they did in the last election. If you remember correctly, Joe Biden was in 5th or 4th place after the first 3 states. Bernie had a commanding lead. And then what happened was Barack Obama got Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg to drop out in the same day, and Jim Clyburn, a black House member from South Carolina, the 2 days before South Carolina primaries, came out and endorsed Joe Biden. And all the black people in South Carolina fell for it, and because they trust Jim Clyburn, and they voted so that Biden could win South Carolina, and then he went on to win the presidency. I don't want us to make that mistake again. I want next time Jim Clyburn comes out and says something in favor of a racial issue, I want you to go, "Fuck Jim Clyburn. He doesn't give a shit about black people. Just because he's black doesn't forgive the fact that he endorsed the segregationist Joe Biden, who is now in office and who has done nothing to alleviate the pain that black people have actually gone through. And in fact, he's standing in the way of it in most cases." So just remember, guys, Kamala Harris doesn't give a shit about black people. Jim Clyburn does not give a shit about black people. If they did, they'd be fighting for some of these things, but they're not. And in fact, Jim Clyburn got the guy that is actively racist and who is not doing anything to become president. And if he had not endorsed Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders would likely be president, and Bernie Sanders is on the right side of all of these things. Now, I'm not sure he's for reparations. He should be, and I think he could be convinced to go there. But certainly dismantling the private prison industry and ending qualified immunity and legalizing marijuana and releasing all nonviolent drug offenders goes along with legalizing marijuana. Anybody that's in jail for a bogus marijuana offense would be released. Bernie would be on the right side of all of that stuff. But no, Jim Clyburn had to go out there and fuck everything up. And everybody bought it because he happens to be black. But he isn't on the side of black people. Remember that. Okay? Candace Owens is not on the side of black people either. She's a Republican. I don't have to tell you guys that. But I'd like to bring this all full circle here, you guys. Shame on Jim Clyburn. And I want to read to you the headline that was June 1st, 1921, and I think it was called the Tulsa World Morning Edition. It read, 2 whites dead in race riot. Let that sink in. Hundreds of blacks dead, doesn't mention any of that. The entire district, Greenwood Village, burnt to the ground, firebombed, by many people who were citizens, but many were deputized police officers were the people committing these atrocities. The law. So have we alleviated some stuff since then? Yeah, I mean some things, but in many ways America is still a very, very racist country, and there's no one standing in the way of racial justice more than Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. So next time they go up for either if it's Biden in 2024 or Harris in 2024, and they're asked something on these racial issues, just remember, they're not helping because they are in favor of the policies that continue to oppress black people. Kamala Harris was doing this when she was DA in California. You know, she famously laughed when she was asked if marijuana should be legalized and said no. And recently when she was asked why Joe Biden hasn't signed an executive order to legalize marijuana, which would help black people so much, she said he's too busy. So these people are not going to help us. And I think that if you happen to be a minority in this country next time, please consider not voting for somebody simply because of their skin color. Look at the policies that they are putting forward that are going to specifically help black people, like the 5 that I just gave you, but there are more. You know, Bernie Sanders would have done far more for black people as the president than Kamala Harris would have, or Stacey Abrams would have, or certainly, you know, any Republicans that are black would have. It matters about the policy, not about what skin color and what kind of facade they put out there. Because Kamala Harris, at this point, I made this joke before, and I'll end on this joke. Kamala Harris, by the end of Joe Biden's 4 years, she's going to get whiter and whiter, that she's going to look like Michael Jackson in 2024. Because she doesn't give a shit about black people. And in a way, I think she actually, in her heart of hearts, wants to be like an elitist white person. So I'll do a couple more episodes for you guys later. Keep fighting the good fight out there. I'll see ya.